bio is very modest as far as listing his publications, but I can definitely say that he is very prolific and well-respected scholar in our field with lots of publications. Today he will talk about harmony and conflict, resolving disputes, and promoting synergistic relationships between East Asians and Westerners. Dr. Leung's presentation will be followed by a question and answer period. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
So I'd like to thank the David Lam Center for Intercultural Communication for inviting me here. And Vancouver is such a lovely city, so I'll come here for any reason. And been here a number of times, but each time is really fresh, and so I'm so happy to be here. Thank Rosalie for setting up the visit. So today I'm going to talk about harmony and conflict. I've been working on several things, but I think this one theme fits this forum very well. I hope you'll tell me it does at the end of the talk. If you have any questions during my presentation, I'm happy to respond to them. There'll be a session for Q&A at the end, but questions in the middle are fine. Harmony and conflict, they're really two opposite perspectives on interpersonal disagreement. In East Asia, when you hear about disagreements, objections, and so on, then people talk about harmony a lot. Whereas in the West, I think the conflict perspective is the salient perspective. Let me tell you a bit about harmony in the Chinese culture first. This first bullet point here is a very famous Chinese saying. I think I heard it when I was a kid and still being used all the time. A harmonious family is a prosperous family. A family in decline is marked by constant quarrels. It's a very, very famous Chinese saying. And in fact, this is my friend, Professor K.K. Huang from Taiwan, and he has a quote about the importance of harmony in Chinese societies. Confucianism emphasizes the value of harmony, and one is conflicting with someone else within his or her social network. First thing one has to learn is forbearance. This leads to giving up one's personal goal for a priori consideration of maintaining a harmonious relationship. So it's sort of harmony is really a very major social theme in Chinese social life. I don't want to get into that too much, but harmony is also a very big value in Japan, Korea, and even in Southeast Asia. I mean, people talk about harmony all the time. Dean Charles and I have edited a book on conflict management in Asia, and then we have chapters from quite a number of Asian countries, and one theme is that most of the chapters, probably all of the chapters, talk about harmony as a major guiding principle when conflicts arise in their cultural context. Just very quickly, this focus on harmony leads to the prevalence of indirect strategies for handling disagreements, disputes, conflicts, and so on. So in the literature, it's easy to see that this theme of conflict avoidance is sort of a very major way of handling conflict, confronting agents. And they also like to use third-party strategies, such as mediation when they have a problem with somebody else. They bring in a third party, usually a respected member by both parties, to try to work as a kind of a broker or as a go-between and try to work something out between the two parties. So I call these indirect strategies. Talk about David Chair before the talk, colleague of mine in Hong Kong. I think he used to be a faculty here on UBC. He's done some work actually comparing mainland Chinese and Canadians. Two types of conflict. One is of an interpersonal nature, that two people don't get along. And his data showed that Chinese actually were more likely to avoid somebody, to avoid contact with that person, if they believe that they had some interpersonal conflict, and more so than Canadians. Okay? But for task conflict, if two people disagree on how to get a thing done, how to get the job done, then they actually, there's not a lot of cultural difference between Chinese and Canadians. Okay, so the personal disputes is much more frightening, much more stressful, so that avoidance becomes the response. Whereas if it's just something about how to get a certain job done, and there are different opinions, then that's not that much of a problem. And Chinese can actually deal with that quite well. So this is an interesting summary of what I've been talking about. You look at the y-axis is the overt conflict behaviors that you actually see. People, what people do to cope with a conflict. And you have conflict intensity, usually conflict of interest. It can be conflict of behavior, it's this potential that people can start a fight. And for Chinese, you see that because of that concern for harmony and because of the salience of tolerance, putting up with a certain level of conflict. So you don't really see a lot of conflictful behavior when conflict intensity is at a low or moderate level, okay? But there's sort of a point, it's kind of a turning point where conflict intensity becomes so big that suddenly, if you like, they lose control or they lose their tolerance, and things become really explosive and things flare up and it sort of get into a kind of a major kind of a conflict situation where people can become quite aggressive and quite hostile. I call it an explosion, So this sort of, things look fine until a certain point where they kind of say, forget it, I cannot put up with this, and then it's sort of followed by a big fight. It's a little bit discontinuous, from sort of fine, nothing, okay, to a major confrontational kind of stance. In fact, I used to have an American friend who worked in Hong Kong. She had a few local Chinese subordinates. And at one point she asked me about these incidents that she had. She said, my subordinates seemed to be very happy and they got along well. But suddenly one day, one woman came to her and said she really couldn't get along with other people. She had to resign. And that's okay, but this subordinate really surprised my American friend because from her perspective, people were getting along just fine. No conflict, no big fight, right? And she didn't know why, suddenly she was so unhappy about her colleagues and she had to leave, because she had no clue why it happened, and then, so I was trying to tell her, look, there was no overt conflict of any kind that you could see, but doesn't mean that people really get along that well, So it's, again, she's sort of, obviously from her American perspective, that kind of a pattern was a little bit surprising, but to me that happens all the time. And I always joke with my colleagues. I've been head of my department for 6 years now, and very few of my local colleagues would knock on my door and say, very angry, I want to talk with you about something that irritates me. It doesn't happen too much. My foreign colleagues, half of my colleagues are non-Chinese, and once in a while they would say, I want to see you, I want to talk about things with you, and so I get that much more from my non-Chinese colleagues than from my Chinese colleagues. So I can see that in action too among my colleagues back in Hong Kong. At this point, I want to digress a little bit, talking about Confucianism, because there's this popular belief that harmony is such a major Confucian value that all these indirect strategies are actually part of the Confucian doctrine. And I want to say this is not true. I say it with confidence because a few years ago I did write a paper on that. I had 2 graduate students from mainland China, and I asked them, have they read any Confucian doctrines? They said they haven't. I said, good, you're going to read all of them, So they spent about 2 months going through all these major classics by Confucius and so on. So, right, it's true that harmony is a major Confucian value. That's true. See it in his writings all the time. But what is not true is that actually harmony is not the guiding principle. It's actually a secondary principle. If you read this quote from the Analects, of the things brought about by the rights, harmony is the most valuable. Of the things of the former kings, this is the most beautiful, and is followed alike in matters great and small. This is the important part. Yet this will not always work. To aim always at harmony without regulating it by the rights simply because one knows only about harmony will not, in fact, work. Rights. To Confucius, there are 2 overarching values that can trump harmony, if you like. One is benevolence. The other one is righteousness. Okay, so these 2 are, if you like, overarching, and harmony should be subservient to these other 2 more high-order values. So harmony is very good, very beautiful. It's very nice, but they cannot, if they're in conflict with these 2 higher-level values, then the harmony should be abandoned, actually. So if you know a little bit about Confucius' life history, he was a traveler. He went from one kingdom to another, trying to persuade kings to adopt his philosophy. And he was very confrontational. He was a straight talker. He actually offended many emperors. He didn't get any big job at all. I mean, he died as of a very tiny kind of a officer of a small place, you know, and so he wasn't famous for being harmonious with people in authority, right? So if you try to look at it from that perspective, conflict avoidance and all these indirect conflict strategies are not really a direct result of Confucianism, at least what the classics say. Because, well, first, he doesn't say it, and second, conflict avoidance is also commonplace in non-Confucian societies such as the Philippines, Indonesia, and so on in Asia. In fact, my Indian friends told me that they also emphasize harmony in India, maybe for different reasons. So I think a better theoretical perspective on that is indirect conflict strategies are more a result of collectivism. This cultural syndrome that you make a bigger distinction between your in-groups, your friends, your family members, and so on, versus the out-group. And within the in-group, there's this tight sense of interdependence. We're in this group together, and we kind of sing or swim together. I think collectivism provides a much better explanation why conflict avoidance or indirect conflict strategies are much more emphasized and used in the Asian context. I think it's not so much Confucianism. So I want to clear his name so he won't be blamed for anybody sort of swallowing something that shouldn't be swallowed, you know, because he's being a good Confucianist. He's not being a good Confucianist if he does that. Let me talk a little bit about the West now. The West has obviously a very different philosophical tradition. And actually, Jane and Watson and I were talking about that a little bit, but we didn't really talk about harmony so much because I know I would be talking about that now. I think in the West, let me just try to simplify that very, very quickly. I think there's this lay belief or this belief that truth emerges from disagreement, debate, and confrontation. I think the legal systems in the West, you know, is vouch for that kind of a belief. I think in Canada you have the adversary system where Hong Kong has the same system too, or more or less the same system where you have two sides and they're both represented by the advocates, you know, and lawyers, and they try to sort of present the best arguments possible, and then you have a impartial third party try to come up with a verdict, you know, and decide, okay, which side should prevail. And science we were talking about science in Europe for the last 300-400 years, Europe and North America, and science is really progresses through debates and disagreements. And we talk about rival hypotheses, you know, talk about competing hypotheses, competing paradigms. So science progresses through competition, through conflict, if you like. And I think in everyday life, I think a lot of people see conflict as part of competition, and competition is a good thing. It brings about progress, brings about improvement of any status quo. So it's a very different epistemological kind of perspective on conflict, on confrontation, on objections, and so on. So it's very different from the Confucian kind of idea of where people should be in harmony, you know. Things should work together well, and they should come up with a way to work together. That's a very different kind of understanding of social life. So coming from that kind of epistemological kind of orientation, so Westerners are much more likely to adopt direct strategies. For instance, they talk about problems, they negotiate, and they're much more willing to talk about problems for improving, for solving the problems. And they're much more likely to engage in kind of a win-lose kind of situation where, for instance, adjudication is an example. You know, your court of law as a win-lose kind of settlement. You know, in fact, compromise. The word in English has two meanings, right? Your credit card has been compromised, and that's the best thing. You know, compromise maybe is not to a Chinese. Compromise is always a good thing, at least most of the time. To a Western, I don't know. Compromise may not be good, or maybe it's probably neutral, or sometimes may be bad. You know, so you see the two cultures really look at disagreements quite differently. So if I try to remember my earlier curve for the Chinese, or for the Asians in general, and I have a red line for the Westerners. I think the Westerners are much more rational, quote unquote, if you like. So I think conflict intensity corresponds to overt conflict behavior more closely. So I think the Westerners probably will talk about issues, talk about problems more earlier on, and when they have some degree of conflict. And obviously, this is interesting because when conflict intensity is huge, actually the Asian line is actually higher than the line for the Westerner. I think when you get to that situation, the Asians are not necessarily very harmonious. They can be very hostile, aggressive, and so on. So I think if you have any idea about Asians being nice and gentle, most of the time it's true. But I think at that point, they can be quite mean and quite aggressive and so on. So this is, I think, an interesting part of the this kind of theorizing on conflict behavior. Okay, so let me sort of summarize a little bit here. Think about intercultural situations where Asians and Westerners work together. Talk about stereotypes now. I'm not saying all Asians feel that way, just some generalizations, right? Let me just declare that I don't want to get into stereotypes, but just some broad generalizations, which may be applicable to a lot of people involved. So Asians may find Westerners pushy, self-centered, and even aggressive, if they work together, right? Because Westerners would want to debate, would want to confront issues and much earlier on when there's a problem and so on. And Westerners may find Asians evasive about disagreements. They don't express their opinions. They don't have a stance, if you like. And they're willing to confront problems. They're complacent about the status quo. They seem happy with they can take a lot of things, and things it's okay. That kind of an issue. So I think there are many examples in our book that conflicts sometimes arise because people approach problems and disagreements quite differently. Because one is sort of more from a harmony perspective, the other side is more from a conflict perspective. So this may happen. Let me try to give you a few hypothetical problems that probably occur in real life. The first two about Asians. Asians may want to get third parties involved when they have a fight, when they have a dispute. But Westerners may see them as unnecessarily complicating the situation. If you and I have a problem, let's talk about them. Talk about it. Let's work something out. And we should act like adults. Right? We can handle a problem, no problem. And if you try to get a third person here to help, that makes it even more complicated. A two-way situation is much easier than having a third person. Then you talk to this third person, and then this person will talk to both of us. Very complicated. We don't need that. How come we can't handle it like adults? Right? So Asians may prefer compromises, but Westerners may find them as ineffective in getting to the root of the problem. Why you need to compromise? There got to be some truth out there, and let's find it, and let's follow that. If there's a way that we can decide on something that's the best for two of us, let's do that, right? So why you want to compromise? Compromise means suboptimality. It's not the best solution. It's just find something that we both can swallow, and that's not good for both of us, right? So compromises may not be seen as good. And from the Asian side, Westerners are emotionally expressive in a confrontation, but Asians may read it as a signal of a meltdown of the relationship. In fact, I was watching a little sort of a reality show yesterday. I couldn't sleep early, right? It's about this woman who was about to get married, and she was yelling at her mother. Something went wrong. Mother didn't do her part, and then the mother was yelling back at her, and they were yelling at each other for about, 1 minute in the reality show. I don't know if you watched the same thing as I did last night. and then on the wedding day, and the mother was so sweet to her, and she was so sweet to the mother. It's like the yelling happened a day before the wedding. And the mother and the daughter were yelling at each other. And the next day, they were so sweet to each other, I know the Western culture quite well, but I was surprised. Even somebody like me was surprised seeing that yelling and then seeing that kissing, that they, on the next day, it's just, to a Chinese person, it's unreal. First, you don't yell at your mother. If you do, you probably won't see her for a week. So this sort of this emotionality is just not so common in an Asian context, I think. I probably can say even Asian, But I think for Westerner, that's just being natural, being yourself. And then the next day, well, it's another day, right? So Asians should should really may misread that kind of a signal, you know. And one last thing is Westerners focus on winning an argument, all right? Winning an argument, winning is everything. And Asians may be alienated by the lack of concern for a long-term relationship. I mean, you keep fighting, and how about the future? How do we get along, you know, a week from now and a month from now and so on. So you can see that these kind of problems, these kind of preferences may generate problems when the two sides try to work together, you know. And these things are very deep-seated, you know. Again, no stereotypes. These are just some broad generalizations that you may see at the workplace or when you have a kind of an intergroup situation. Before I talk about the dual concern model, any questions or anything here? Make sense to you?
I do have a question.
Okay, yeah.
With regard to the two graphs that you have.
Okay.
When does it reach a point where, you know, like when the conflict intensity becomes explosive under what circumstances?
I think, yeah, the point of, I understand the what do we call it, inflection point, the point where the curve really changes slope tremendously. I think it's very hard to say. I can't really give you an exact kind of magnitude, but I think it's like when one side cannot take it, then sort of that person wakes up one morning and say, forget it, I can't take this anymore, and I'm going to deal with it, you know. And so I think it's just, it's very hard to, in the abstract, it's very hard to say, yeah, what is that point, and it's very hard to define it. But I think maybe it's over time. It's a lot of small hassles, you know. Over time you cannot put up with it, or maybe it's just one big incident, you know. It's like the one event becomes a triggering event, you know. And then you decide you can't put up with it anymore. So maybe one triggering event, or maybe just many small episodes added together. But it's that point, that's sort of a point of no return. Once you realize you can't really do it anymore, and then you become so hostile, so confrontational that the conflict level can go up tremendously in a short time. You start really yelling, and you start doing a lot of offensive kind of behaviors, you know, try to get the other side. And that's why I say when you get to that point, it's a very sharp rise in overt behavior, overt conflict behavior, to the point that it becomes really an all-out war that can't be managed very easily anymore, you know, in a very short time. So in a way, I like the Western profile, actually, because it's more gradual, and if your problems become bigger, you try to deal with it accordingly. So you can deal with it much earlier on because you're aware of that, you know. So I don't know, is anybody has any experience on that? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
And I'm enjoying this. I'm wondering if there's, and I'd like your thoughts on this project, and I'm wondering if we are perhaps misunderstanding and not giving the appropriate value to Confucian idea of harmony. When we look at nature, and I'm sure he did too,
of course,
the whole idea of harmony in nature isn't all sweet. Right. I mean, lions go and kill their prey. That's part of the harmony of nature. And I'm wondering if this thing we've been talking about or thinking about, I have anyhow, about this Confucian harmony, has missed the point, perhaps. I mean, he was not a wallflower. Can you shed some light on this Confucian notion of harmony? Is there a hidden notion of harmony that has not been presented properly because of perhaps some other cultural agenda or whatever, that we're missing this? You mentioned here, you know, at a certain point, right, the Asians can switch over and suddenly bypass. They go on the attack. Is that part of the harmony, though? I mean, can that be seen in this context?
That's an interesting notion. Confucius talks about harmony. He talks about on many levels. You know, one is be in harmony with nature. That's a different kind. I talk about interpersonal harmony here, but then that's a different level of harmony. You know, harmony with nature. And so it's a complex question. Maybe I'll try to get back to you after some empirical findings. Right? Maybe that's a little bit easier. Yeah.
Two points you made.
Okay.
About the Asians being more concerned about the long-term relationship.
Right.
And earlier on, you made a talk in endurance because of pre-arranged agreements. Would the Asian cultural mind have a clearer understanding of what these agreements are as opposed to the Western ones, or would there be a different set?
I think they're not really explicit agreements. I think they're implicit norms that if you and I are working together, then we should have a future. We should try to work hard for a long-term future. So they're more implicit norms, I think. Yeah.
Would that be clearer to the Eastern mind?
Probably, I think so. In the in-group, I think it's stronger. I think Westerners also talk about strong team. I'll get to that a little bit. Of course, Westerners want to work as a team too, but I think it's just more salient. I think for Asians, that when they're in a group, then the in-group cohesion becomes a bigger issue for them. Yeah.
So those pre-agreements are stronger within the Asian groups?
That would be my bet. Yeah.
Okay.
That would be my bet. Yeah. Yes.
On your chart,
okay.
Can you go back?
Sure.
Just wanted to see whether conflict intensity for both cultures reaches the same distance from zero when that explosion happens, or
okay.
actually reach the explosion point at different.
Okay, this is really just to illustrate. These are broad generalizations. Some Westerners can explode in 1 second, right? So I'm not. I hate to get into stereotypes. These are really broad generalizations. So I think the broad generalization is that Westerners may be a little bit more gradual. So there's sort of a stronger correspondence between conflict intensity and overt conflict behavior. So the explosion is less obvious. But for some Westerners, maybe they explode. I'm sure you've run into those types before, right? So and there are some Chinese who don't explode. I like to believe that I don't explode. If I disagree with Rosalie, I tell her so. So I won't just put up with Rosalie, right? So in the name of science, okay. Okay, let me get to the Western model a little bit, and then I'll tell you a study that I did. There are many conflict theories in the West. I think this one probably is the most well-known, the dual concern model. So on the y-axis, this model is based on really concerns for outcomes. We'll talk about economics during lunch. This is really an example of a sort of a social exchange model where, okay, when I go into a conflict, what do I care about? I care about my own outcome. That's concern for self on the y-axis. On the horizontal axis, that's concern for other people's outcome, right? So it's an outcome-based model. So when you cross these two concerns, you have 5 conflict styles. Take dominating as an example. When do you dominate? Okay, when you care a lot about your own outcome and you don't care what the other person gets, then you dominate the other person. Obliging is the opposite. You care about their outcome. You don't care about your own outcome, so you oblige. You accommodate. You give them what they want. So integrating or win-win solutions arise when there's a huge concern for the outcomes of both sides. You want both sides to have the best outcomes. Then you try to integrate. You try to problem solve, or you try to come up with a win-win solution. Right? Avoiding is low. You don't care about anything. Then just don't talk about it. That's how I try to tell my wife. Sometimes we disagree. Don't talk about it. Doesn't matter really. Affect nobody. So just don't. We'll forget about it in a week, right? So I actually I use avoidance a lot too. So whether there's no there's no best strategy, if you like. It's like depends on your goals, and you sort of pick a strategy that fits your goals. So this is an outcome-based model, very different from a harmony-based model. Quite a bit of work has been done in Asia using this dual concern model. So to summarize, the 5 styles are identifiable in Asia. They're understood by Asians, and they're used by Asians. In general, Asians are higher in avoiding, as I said earlier on, and they're lower in dominating and problem solving. Okay, so try to summarize a number of studies, and this is a common pattern of findings. So you can pose the question, okay, dual concern model is based on outcome concerns, and what kind of a conflict framework will you have if you look at harmony as your kind of building block? What kind of model would you get? It comes down to actually a kind of a epistemological question. The 2 modes of discovery for universal theory. At the end, if we can build a theory that works everywhere, then there are really three ways to begin. One is you try to use a Western theory, try to use some Western findings as your starting point. So you can start with the dual concern model and try to work, try to use it elsewhere, everywhere, and see if that model works everywhere. There's a middle-of-the-ground approach, what I call the cross-cultural approach, where you try to develop a theory by taking into account all kinds of cultural contexts. I think a major line of work in individualism collectivism is sort of from that theoretical tradition, where you look at the world and say, all right, there's some cultures that emphasize groups, and there are some other cultures that emphasize the person. That's Hofstede's work. I think that's so well known now, I don't need any introduction. And then there's an indigenous approach or a non-Western approach, where you start with local theories and local findings as your starting point. And you try to then apply your findings to a Western context, or you try to use it around the world and see if you get something that can work everywhere, right? So harmony is such a theory. What if you build a conflict theory based on a harmony perspective? I mean, how would that be different from a perspective based on dual concern model, which is based on outcome concerns? Okay, so if you think in terms of harmony, then actually two facets are quite salient. First one I call harmony enhancement. Confucianism regards harmony as a goal rather than a means to an end. I mean, it's an ideal state of being. It's beautiful, as it remember the earlier quote. And harmony is virtuous and good in and of itself. I mean, being in harmony is a good thing, and it's a good thing to do, and it's really quite nice. It's something that you go after, and that's something you want to pursue. Okay, so that's really closer to the Confucianist definition of harmony. The second perspective is quite different. It's a dynamic set into action by cultural collectivism. Okay, you're in this group situation, which is very cohesive, and you don't really want to offend anybody. You don't want to strain any relationship, and you want everybody to be happy together. So one big happy family, and because you worry that if you try to criticize people or you try to be critical, they don't like you, and then it disrupts the relationship and so on. So this is sort of harmony maintenance is really just self-serving in it, because you worry they'll get you back and so on. So conflict avoidance is actually a manifestation of that kind of an orientation. Think about it. If you and I have a problem and we try not to talk about it, there's no resolution, right? Things won't get changed for the better. So why you want to avoid a certain problem? Because if you worry that if you bring it out in the open, then both sides may feel hurt, and then you can't get along anymore, and then you worry about the repercussion of an open discussion, then this becomes an instrumental kind of behavior, So roughly you can sort of say, yeah, collectivism may engender such a kind of an orientation that you worry about disrupting any kind of relationship. So it has a very obvious instrumental ring to this sort of orientation. So you're afraid of losing harmony, if you like. That's why I label this as this integration avoiding. You worry about this any kind of this integration in the relationship. So harmony enhancement is more sort of confusion in nature, whereas this integration avoidance is sort of more collectivistic in orientation. So I've done some work in Hong Kong together with a mainland Chinese graduate student. So we identify a number of harmony motives behind harmonious behaviors by open-ended procedure. We interview people and we study a lot of Chinese proverbs. Remember my opening slide? It was this proverb about harmonious family being a prosperous family. That's one of those Chinese proverbs. And based on these interviews and proverbs, we developed a harmony motive scale, and we administered the scale to a group of adults in Hong Kong. And based on an exploratory factor analysis, we actually identified 3 factors. I'll tell you the first 2. First one is it's really quite close to my original idea of harmony enhancement. These are the translation of the sample items. So the first one is really about the family. Everything prospers when there's a harmony in the family. Maintaining harmony among family members is very important. Making concessions demonstrates one's maturity and capacity for forgiveness. Being tolerant and compromising demonstrates the superiority of one's social maturity compared to that of ordinary people, right? You can see that harmony is a good state of being. It's an ideal that one should pursue. And then the second factor is much more instrumental in nature. And the content of the items really fit my original conceptualization of this integration avoidance. One should treat people who are in a more powerful position in an accommodating manner, right? It sounds very instrumental to me. In society, one cannot help but ride with the tide. It's better not to be disturbed by what may seem unacceptable or fair. If one's losses are limited, there's no need to fight to the end. You see the instrumental kind of connotation in these items that you worry about some loss. That's why you're able to. That's why you want to put up with something that you don't like. So this scale, the content really echoes my earlier description of this dimension of this integration avoidance. There's a third factor that I'm not going to tell you about it. It's called harmony as hindrance. And we have items that says something like if you really value harmony, you may lose sight of how to improve things, and you may have to swallow a lot of injustice and so on. So actually, Chinese do see harmony as a problem sometimes, you know. But I'm not interested in that so much, so I don't present it here. So let me tell you about a cross-cultural study that I did after the first study. We wanted to test the validity of the instrument in Beijing. Because the first one was done in Hong Kong, I wanted some generality of the data. And then I wanted to take it out to Sydney. Well, why Sydney? Because I had a friend there. She was very interested in this topic. So her name is Fran Brew. She's working at Macquarie University. So we met in a conference, and she's a conflict researcher. And so we were talking about this, and she became very, very interested in the idea. So we wanted to know if harmony perspective has any applicability in a Western context, you know. And Sydney, Australia is one of the Anglo societies, you know. So that sort of makes it quite interesting. So we had adults responding to my harmony scale and a scale based on the dual concern model. And we wanted to see if the harmony motives are related to each of the 5 conflict styles of the dual concern model in any sort of systematic way. Let me tell you about some predictions. First, you recall that the dual concern model works in Asia. There's no reason why the harmony model doesn't work in the West. I mean, I think it's a two-way traffic. I think the Westerners don't really think about harmony too much. Doesn't mean that they don't understand harmony, and it doesn't mean that it's not applicable to them. So we argue that, yeah, the harmony scale should work in Australia too. And then we make some culture general predictions. Think about this integration avoidance. If you have that orientation, obviously you will avoid conflict. Doesn't matter you are Chinese or Australian. You see the same thing. And we also argue that this integration avoidance and harmony enhancement both will be positively related to obliging. If you really value harmony, or you worry about disrupting a relationship, of course you will say yes to some extent. But we predict that the effect it will be stronger for this integration harmony avoidance than for harmony enhancement. The logic is that if you really worry about straining a relationship, you'll say yes much more readily. Right? If you think about harmony, then you think about maybe we can work this out, maybe we can find a better solution. So you'll say yes, but you probably won't do it too much, you know, because you are always thinking about a better solution, right? If you get into if you are high in harmony enhancement. And then we also make the same prediction for compromising. Compromising is to find a way that both sides can accept. And here we make the opposite prediction. We believe that harmony enhancement should be more strongly related to compromising than this integration avoidance. Because compromising, at least you find a solution that both sides accept. Obliging, saying yes is just give up, you know, just give in. So we expect that this relationship should be stronger for harmony enhancement than for this integration avoiding. And the next prediction is straightforward. We believe that this integration avoidance should be negatively related to integrating. They just don't try to work out something that's good for both sides. On the other hand, we believe that harmony enhancement will encourage you to look for a win-win solution, okay? Because that's really good for harmony. I mean, both sides get the best. What else is better than that, right? So we predict a positive relationship between these two, harmony enhancement and integrating. And finally, we believe that both this integration avoidance and harmony enhancement will be negatively related to dominating, right? You don't want to dominate the other side. You embrace harmony. Whether you worry about the relationship or whether you really treasure harmony, you will not dominate the other side. So these predictions are culture general. And we do have some cultural differences expected. We expect that the harmony is bigger for Chinese and for Australians for both types. And in terms of conflict styles, we expect that Chinese should be higher in avoiding, obliging, and compromising, whereas Australians should be higher in dominating and integrating. So this is sort of consistent with the previous literature. We have some surprises here, so I'll tell you in a minute. So I don't know if you can follow my predictions. It's okay?
For the Sydney sample,
yeah.
Were these all Caucasians?
Yes, European Australians. No Asian Australians, right? We try to be very careful. So there are a lot of Asians in Sydney too, so we try to avoid them so that we have if you like, a sharper contrast. Then we tested we've done quite a bit of statistics, and we tested the invariance of the loadings. What I can tell you is that the scale works quite well in Australia too, and it works quite well in Beijing, so the items are pretty good. And then we've done some regression. Don't forget about this. Don't worry about this picture. I just want to show you we've done the work, So we've done some regressions. we've done some regression analysis using the harmony motives to predict each of the 5 conflict styles. So the conflict styles are the dependent variables, and we use the 2 harmony motives to predict various conflict styles. So let me summarize the result very quickly for you. As predicted, the harmony motives work out well in both places, so we can claim cross-cultural equivalence of that scale. Second finding, as predicted, this integration avoidance is in fact related to avoiding. You're higher in DA, then you avoid more. When we look at obliging, then there's some surprise here. For Chinese, the results are consistent with our prediction. So, both harmony motives are related to obliging, okay? But and then the effect, the relationship is actually stronger for this integration avoidance than for harmony enhancement, right? So if Chinese endorsed this integration avoidance, then they were more likely to oblige, and that effect is stronger for this integration avoidance. But for Australians, it's opposite to our prediction, okay? So as you can see from the beta weights, if Australians endorsed harmony enhancement, then they were more likely to oblige, right? And no relationship was found for obliging and this integration avoidance, okay? So the Australians were quite different from the Chinese in this regard, and seems like to the Australians, obliging is something actually positive. It's only when you endorse harmony enhancement that you are willing to oblige, and that's it's quite interesting. I'll come back to that a little bit later on. For compromising, our effects, the results are consistent with our predictions. Okay, so both harmony motives are positively related to compromising, and in fact, the effect for harmony enhancement is actually stronger than that for this integration avoidance. Okay, and the findings regarding integration is as predicted too. Harmony enhancement is positively related to integrating, whereas this integration avoidance is negatively related to integrating. The last one is, again, surprising. For both groups, the more they endorse this integration avoidance, the more they were to dominate, not to, right? We predicted kind of a negative relationship, but it's the opposite of what we expected, right? So that this is quite interesting. I'll explain in a minute. Now let's look at conflict styles. Well, first, the harmony motives. As predicted, the Chinese score higher in both harmony motives. That's not surprising. And Chinese scored also higher in avoiding and in integrating. That's as is expected. But unexpectedly, Chinese actually scored lower in obliging, lower in compromising, and higher in dominating. That's opposite of what we predicted. Okay, so again, you look at obliging here. Chinese did not like that style too much. Okay, and you recall that actually in Australia, in the earlier finding about the obliging and this integration avoiding. Okay, so let me kind of talk about the differences a little bit. So Chinese go high in both harmony, enhancement, and this integration avoidance. So you can see Chinese are being affected by collectivism and Confucianism, both. So they like harmony, enhancement. They also like, well, this integration avoidance. So it's sort of this value motive plus this instrumental motive. They are both operative. And as I said earlier, this integration avoidance was related to obliging for Chinese, but not for Australians. So obliging may be viewed as much more negative in China than in Australia. You recall that Chinese actually endorsed obliging less than did Australians. Okay, so Chinese really didn't like obliging. They only did it if they endorsed this integration avoidance, meaning that they really worry about straining a relationship. Then they would oblige. Otherwise, they would not. And surprisingly, Chinese score lower than Australians in obliging and compromising, but high in dominating. We thought, yeah, this is a little bit different from the literature. It's something that we did not predict, something that sort of surprised us. But then I spoke to my mainland Chinese friends and my graduate students from mainland China, and they say, oh, it makes sense. Right now, China is in a high growth period, and you go to a big city like Beijing, many of the people are actually from outside. They're migrants from other cities, all right? And they're very aggressive and they're very enterprising. So you have these competitive efforts in mainland China now everywhere, especially in big cities. And they are migrants, so they don't really belong to any group. They go to Beijing to make it, right? So of course they will not oblige. Of course they will not. They would not compromise, you know. And I think then we were looking at sort of some literature that could ground this theoretically, and we came across a literature on passive aggressiveness. That's quite interesting. There's been such a literature. So on the one hand, they avoid conflict, but on the other hand, they also try to dominate. And how to explain that? And one way to explain that is yeah, traditionally avoiding has been a kind of a cultural response. It's kind of a default response that people carry with them, right, from their parents maybe, you know, and from their socialization experiences. On the other hand, they are in this new environment where competition is good and where making it is important and doing well is important. Enterprising is really the cultural value now. So that comes to the part where they don't want to oblige, they want to dominate, they want to compete, you know. So it's quite interesting. You have these two tendencies in the same group of people, you know, right? So you have this imprint from cultural traditions. You have this influence from the current efforts, you know, from the current ambience that in which competition is everything. You go to Beijing, the only thing you talk about is competition, really. I taught in Beijing for a couple weeks a year ago. I was doing this EMBA course, and I mean, it's nothing that we talk about except competition almost, how to win the competition, you know. So I can understand that now. So let me kind of talk about the future a little bit. Recall the dual concern model where you cross the two concerns, two outcome concerns, and you create these 5 conflict styles. What if you do the same thing to these 2 harmony motives, right? You have these 2 harmony motives, and you can cross the 2 motives. Then you have 4 harmony styles, if you like. And I just quickly go over these 4 styles. I label them as balancing, smoothing, aligning, and aligning and disintegrating. They may not be the best labels, but I hope you get a flavor of this kind of theoretical work. So balancing is the style where you emphasize both. Okay, you worry about straining a relationship, but you also think where harmony is an ideal that you should pursue. You embrace both. And I like to believe I'm a balancer, actually. I see myself as I'm doing that. You know, I'm a department head, so I need to manage my colleagues, and I like to say, yeah, it's nice that we're in one big happy family, but also but also we should go for the best solution too. You just trying to be happy with each other and that doesn't do anything, that's no good. So I want to do both. Smoothing is where you only emphasize this integration avoidance and you have low emphasis on harmony and enhancing. I think a lot of Chinese belong to that category, I think, where you see conflict avoidance being the dominant conflict mode. You know, when you have a problem, don't talk about it until you can't put up with it anymore. Now, I think this moving style is probably not very productive. But a lot of Chinese and probably a lot of Asians are in that category, I think. Aligning is where you only talk about harmony enhancing, and you don't really worry about any kind of this integration avoidance. You pursue harmony and you debate. I think Confucius is in that box, if I can categorize him. You know, he's the guy who says, you know, these are the principles, I must stick to them. And then he would argue, would debate, and he wouldn't budge, if you like. So I think Confucius is actually in that aligning box. No concern for kind of an ongoing relationship as such. To Confucius, the principles are ultimate. That's it. No compromise. Take it or leave it, you know, kind of an approach. And the last category is this integrating, where you don't care about any harmony. Okay, so it's sort of a marginal kind of a person. You know, this person doesn't care about anything. It's like, actually, this is interesting because recall that in the dual concern model, you have low. If you have low concern for both, for yourself and for other people, then you avoid. Okay, so avoiding actually has a very different meaning in the dual concern model. In that model, it means you don't care about any outcomes at all. But in the harmony perspective, well, you don't care about any harmony, then you basically will do anything you want, you say anything you want. This person is sort of a loose cannon, if you like. This person can be very disruptive, can be quite conflictful. All right? It's just unpredictable, yeah, if you're in that box. So it's a very different kind of a character than the low concern for self and low concern for others as depicted in the dual concern model. So what do we do, well, for the future in terms of developing better conflict theories? There are a few things here we could do. One is we could test the generality of the dualistic model of harmony in the West. Whether these two harmony motives make sense in the West, I think we tested it in Sydney only, and there are other Western societies we can test. So, for instance, whether does it make sense to you in Canada or in Vancouver? These two harmony perspectives. Whether the four harmony styles make any sense here? That's to me is quite interesting. You know, so this is taking a Chinese idea and then develop a framework and then try to test it everywhere in the world. This is sort of the third mode of discovery where you take a local kind of theory and try to test it everywhere in the world. And that's the first step, and I think that would be very useful. The second step is more ambitious. It's much harder to do. It's okay, now we have the dual concern model as probably the most well-known Western model. Now we have this harmony model. Is there any way we can integrate the two? Obviously, if the two models can be integrated in some meaningful way, then the resultant model should be much more powerful. It should be more general. It should be more able to predict all kinds of phenomena, right? So that's probably something we must do. One way to look at it is how about that? If the dual concern model, because the dual concern model is based on outcomes. So a simple prediction would be, yeah, this model should be more predictive of outcome-related variables, such as when you're in a conflict situation, how about joint outcome as your dependent variable? Whether people can develop an arrangement in which both sides get very good outcomes. You know, but that kind of a outcome-based kind of prediction may be better. Dual concern model may be much better for that kind of a prediction. Now, harmony motives are based on interpersonal concerns. It's not based on outcome concerns. So a kind of a parallel reasoning would suggest that maybe harmony motives are more predictive of relational variables, such as, do people want to work together again? Future collaboration. Do people like each other? Okay, mutual attraction. Now, these kind of variables are usually not studied very much in a conflict situation. It's very interesting because you look at the conflict literature, which is mostly Western, the typical variables are outcome-oriented. Okay, joint gains, self-gain, and other gain. That kind of variables are being talked about a lot, and there hasn't been much attention on relational variables. Will they form the same team again, and how long that team will last, and that kind of thing. So the conflict literature is much more transactional in nature. You look at the Western literature. I think partly because the focus is on outcomes. Actually, outcomes for the short run, not even for the long run. So you have transactional outcomes being predicted by those models. So if you look at a more kind of a long-term perspective, you look at then these relational outcome variables make sense, right? Will people work together? How long can they work together? Will they choose to work together again if they have the chance, or would they change teammates when they have a chance to work again? That kind of variables. And I think the harmony perspective may be able to highlight those variables and in fact generate some interesting predictions in terms of how do we understand these sort of more long-term interpersonal dynamics. I think context, the effect of context hasn't been studied too much. I think one major variable here is in-group, out-group boundary and harmony motives. As I alluded to earlier, in collectivist societies, this group boundary is much more salient. So if I think about harmony motives and group boundary, then this is a very obvious prediction that the harmony enhancement is probably stronger with in-group members, that they try to come up with something positive for everybody. And with out-group members you don't know or members you don't trust, then you become much more defensive, and this integration avoidance becomes more of a norm, than harmony enhancement. So that's interesting to see how group boundaries may affect people's harmony motives, and that could be tested. And talking about another contextual variable is the stakes involved. I mean, if major stakes are involved, I think people become instrumental, and economic gains become overriding. So I believe that people's harmony motives may shift as a function of the kind of issues that they're dealing with. When the economic stakes are big, then many people will track to kind of this integration avoiding mode, and they become more economical, if you like, or they become more economically rational, if you like. Then this harmony motive becomes, this harmony enhancement motive becomes sort of drops into the background, right? And then it probably won't affect too much of their action. Okay, so these are some interesting predictions. At this point, maybe I can answer some questions before I talk about synergies between the East and the West. Is there any questions at this point? Yeah.
First is, how did you measure each of these dimensions? When people asked you, just respond to certain items?
That's right. These are some actual items here, right? Each scale has about 10 items. Yeah, took us a lot to translate because the items were written in Chinese and they were written quite idiomatically. took days for me and my Australian collaborators to translate that into English. So sometimes the English may not sound right to you because it's very hard to do so.
The second short question is, did you compare did you make it a three-way comparison? Did you include the Hong Kong?
No. We didn't have the dual concern items for the Hong Kong sample. We only had the harmony items, so we couldn't really do that. Yeah.
One question also. The fact that two things that you say were economic development or economic state.
Right.
The state makes a difference, and the other one was because Beijingers were saying because of the country people or migrants, basically,
right.
Things are different. They say about everything. But I was wondering whether you think if you conducted the same research in, for instance, more economically developed parts of China, such as Shanghai, compared to less developed ones, such as, I don't know, just any central part of China, would have a difference then?
That would be an interesting study, because if you look at the literature, there have been quite a number of studies, and most of the studies show that actually Westerners score higher in dominating than Asians. So our finding is the reversal of that. But my Australian collaborators say, Australians are easygoing people. I mean, they are not like Americans. So that might be one reason why the Australians are less dominating. But I don't know about that too much. I think so. So this is a kind of a contextual variable we're talking about here. You know, when people in a very competitive environment, then this competitive environment overrides the effect of culture, and that's testable. I think it's something that we probably should test because we didn't have that measure in our study. We were just trying to explain it in a post hoc fashion, right? I would believe so. If you go to the countryside where people are from that village, you know, for generations, I don't think they will be very high in dominating. They will be more like what we see in the literature. Yeah.
Would a fuller elaboration of the meaning of the word harmony affect the outcomes that you've done in this research? Because it seems to me that there are very different understandings of the meaning of the word harmony amongst people from different cultural groups. And part of understanding the meaning of harmony for me is difference in unison or interaction and penetration, rather than a sense of harmony as being non-confrontational, homogeneous, and things like that. So I'm wondering if it would affect the research outcomes that you've
Definitely, because that's why we did the first study was try to elicit finance of the notion harmony because it's so abstract in general, right? So we in the first study we asked people to think of the conflict, right, and then describe your behaviors, and then explain why you acted in a certain way. Yeah, I do that because it demonstrates my maturity. I'm at a high level. That's why I don't really need to fight with that person and so on. So we captured that by the second statement on this slide. So so we didn't have anything. I think when people when Chinese think of a conflict, and these are sort of major reasons that they would act in a certain way, right? So we didn't write these items, but they came from the respondents. I'm sure if you write other items, you try to then maybe you capture something else, but not these two. So I think definitely that's yeah.
Because related to that might be if you factor in considerations of power and hierarchical relationships with the need to obey,
right,
and the need to assert, would probably have some kind of an impact.
Well, that's the first item here, right? You must accommodate to somebody who has authority, right? Yeah. So the power distance came out too in some of the items, and the last one is obviously instrumental. You know, we do have a couple items that are about authorities, and I think when people think about accommodating, usually they think of some authority figures that they can't afford to offend. You know, so that's why they swallow. You know, things that they don't like, and so that's into the picture too. Yeah. Okay.
You mentioned about context, and then you touched briefly on the changing economic climate of China. So I wonder, within the context piece, how do your participants, or what political ideology play with the participants that you interviewed?
Yeah, that's not something we did not measure, because I think we have one argument here about economic development, about competition. That I think that's probably a leading explanation, but there may be others. I mean, we didn't have anything political, you know.
Well, not maybe I should say not so much political, but also the influence of, say, capitalist states or states that have been colonized. So the impact of when you say Western, I'm wondering what does Western mean? Do you mean people that have been colonized? Do you mean people?
No, I didn't say Western. I said competition. No West. No. It's.
But the paradigm between the Asian and the Westerners, I'm wondering in the political context, what does that mean? Because I suspect that might have some, factor playing in, the participants from China, for example, that have.
I don't think so, because they respond. They respond to harmony items like those presented here, and then they sort of responded to a conflict style inventory, and then that conflict style inventory captures so what they usually would do when they are in a dispute, right? So they would say, well, I'll do the following, So then we can capture whether what dominant style they use, right, in terms of that dual concern model, their fight style. So I think you're raising a very broad question, and it probably doesn't really affect their responses here because they have specific items to respond to, and probably colonization is probably not part of the picture here. So no, I think competition, the current economic pressure is a much more salient force to them than what you're talking about. And you're talking about this is Beijing and Sydney, right? So right.
Yeah, I thought the way you put it together at the end when you talked about the time and the stakes involved, that made a lot of sense to me. And because it seems to me that and I'd like to know your thoughts on this, that someone may not only give up, but in fact destroy harmony in the short term to create it in the long term. And I wondered if you noticed something like that. I mean, just imagine someone says, look, we're in this relationship, and I know what I'm doing, and you're probably going to dislike me now, but you're going to love me when I come back with the success at the end.
Yeah, that's Western thinking at its best. That you and I disagree for a better future. Right? So that I think that's implicit in the Western kind of epistemology. I say, like truth comes out of debate, and truth is. It's best for all of us if we're able to hammer out truth, right, by immediate disagreement and confrontation. If you say something, if I say something that irritates you, you tell me right away, so I won't go down the wrong path, right? So I think that's more implicit in the West than in the
But see, there's another side to the coin, which I've also made a note of, and I find that it can be overlooked, and that is, then you take the side where I'm going to create this wonderful harmony, and then I realize down the road that you've created this harmony and created tremendous loss of opportunity. And this harmony and long-term relationship you were trying to build, I say, forget it. I don't need harmony at that expense. It's a wonderful relationship, but it's costing me too much.
Exactly. That's why we actually found a third factor that I did not describe here. I label it as harmony as hindrance. Actually, to a lot of Chinese, harmony is bad because it means you put up with things that you shouldn't, and you swallow injustice and that kind of thing. But this harmony enhancement motive is different because we call that it actually correlates with integrating, all right, positively for Chinese and for Australians. If you believe in those statements, then you also believe in looking for a win-win solution. So, but this integration avoidance is the opposite. If you believe in these items, then you get into avoiding, and you don't want integrating. You actually suppress integrating, right? So and Chinese are high hope. Okay. So it depends on like which motive is salient to you. And I like to believe I am high in this enhancement dimension, So I can disagree and so on and so forth. So there are other items too that say like harmony is sort of an ideal state and so on, but doesn't say you must put up with people in power. You must tolerate, things that are unfair. It doesn't contain those statements at all here. That's why this dimension correlates with integrating positively. Okay. Yeah, you have a question too, or comment?
I'm interested in your explanations for the origins of the factors.
Yeah.
You're mentioning that harmony enhancement comes more from the Confucian ideas versus disintegration avoidance comes more from the collectivist natures.
Yes.
So would you expect to see more harmony enhancement in traditionally Confucian cultures versus other collectivist cultures?
No, because East Asians, only East Asians are Confucianists, not South Asians, not Southeast Asians. And actually, I asked my two PhD students from mainland China, I said, have you read any doctrines? No, they say no. So most Chinese have not read any Confucian doctrines. I mean, just like I think most Westerners haven't read like Plato, the whole book or whatever. Same thing, So what people know is a secular version of it. I mean, it's not really the real thing. They got it from their parents, and so not necessarily. I mean, there are really no strong Confucian culture now because you don't go to a place where everybody has read the Confucian analects. I mean that was true maybe 300 years ago, not now. So what people people get is sort of what they hear from their teachers and parents, and they haven't read the classics themselves. So that's why this is so that's why they're affected by both.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then by saying it's from the Confucianism, you just mean it's
from the
related
classics,
to that.
From the classics.
Mm-hmm.
They're related to the classics, right? The Confucian classics. They say these, they have the following sort of teachings, if you like.
But you find it in cultures even that have not had a Confucian culture.
Which one? Harmony and enhancement?
So you find both.
Yeah. I think I'm not surprised if we go to a certain culture that the people there may score even higher in harmony and enhancement than Chinese. I'm not surprised. There's probably such a culture somewhere. Maybe. In fact, my colleague Michael Bond, I think, who gave a lecture in this series too, right? Some years ago. He had this instrument that he put together. He called it Chinese Value Survey, right? So this instrument was composed of all Chinese values. And there are many societies actually, many societies score higher than Chinese societies in that instrument. So after all, the values are not the Chinese, because there are some societies that are not Chinese, but they score actually higher than Chinese societies. So I believe, there must be some cultures of that nature that they embrace harmony even more than the Chinese do. Yes?
Just doing this history series in the rise and falls of civilizations.
Okay.
And most civilizations have a peak and maintenance period of 100 to 300 years perhaps from the outside, with the exception of the Chinese, which is almost 1,000 years with several dynasties in there. But would you attribute that prolonged period of maintenance to the things that you're talking about?
Confucianism, you mean, or harmonies?
Or the Eastern Rite, because some of this is, around the Confucian time, but not necessarily some of it before, possibly. Because the Chinese civilization was peculiar in the length of time. It was like more than double than any other civilization.
I don't know. That's hard to say, because the Mongolians were not Chinese before, and the Manchurians were not. Talk about.
But they integrated.
Yeah. They integrated, so now they're Chinese. So it's hard to say.
Long period.
Yeah.
Peaking of the maintenance of almost 1,000 years, where all the other civilization were only equal to 100 to 300 years.
I really can't respond. I'm not a historian. You may answer for me. Please.
I see it a little bit different.
Please.
Chinese civilization. It's kind of a meta organization within which all Chinese have always seen history as xing shui, as rise and fall. And the average dynasty, the famous dynasties are the 200, 300 years.
Right. But then he talked about the culture, though. The dynasties sort of came in. They kind of come and go, but the culture.
Chinese culture or Chinese civilization. You could compare that to European culture. European culture has been around for several thousand years too.
Yeah.
And the different manifestations within China, Cantonese, Shanghainese, Hokkien, so forth. Those languages are as different from each other. Language culture systems are as different from each other as French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese are from each other. But they all coexist within a worldview. Which could be comparable. You could compare that to Chinese civilization, but I don't think Chinese civilizationism it's not like a regime or something like that. It's a mindset.
Right. On this trip, I have a book with me. I like to read a book when I'm doing long hauls. So this book is about Chinese architecture. So I try to learn whether Chinese architecture has been intact for 2,000 years. I don't know, and I'll find out on my way back. I was too busy doing this talk on my way here. So. Okay, let me tell you a few things about synergies. Then I'll try to answer more questions. I'm sure.
Did you have differences in the age of the respondents?
Age?
So you mentioned that some of the older...
Yeah, I did. Actually, I'm on tape, so we did look at age, and I remember the patterns were opposite for Chinese and for Australians. I don't recall the details now, because we're too focused on the content. And I may be wrong. Let me say it first. But I remember the younger the Chinese, the more they were the more they would show the pattern that I'm telling you. Like this passive aggressiveness, that they would do both. They would avoid, but then they would try to fight. They would try to dominate. And the Australians were the opposite. They were, the older they were, then the more they were like traditional. So, but I don't remember that too well. So I'll try to get back to you in the future.
And
Yeah.
also gender differences, because I would imagine that women,
Yeah.
regardless of culture, tend to be more.
Yeah. We didn't really look at that. See, I'm trained as a psychologist. I don't look at those demographic differences too much. But I think I should go back and take a look at that. Too much into general theory, to forget about there are two genders in the world, and there are young people and old people, But we did look at those effects. But I just don't they don't register, And we did have quite a range because we had adult samples, So it was quite a range. But I really should go back and take a look at that. Okay, let me tell you about synergies a little bit, and then we can sort of debate a little bit more. Obviously, Asians can deal with problems. Obvious now. If you promote harmony enhancement, then they can get into a win-win mode. They can get into a problem-solving mode, right? And actually, they're quite high on that, actually, right? So if you're a manager, and then you probably will say, yeah, let's promote harmony enhancement. Let's reduce conflict avoidance. I mean, harmony enhancement is an indigenous concept within Asia or, among Chinese. So it's not something foreign. Talking about your colonization kind of thing. You say win-win or don't get into zero-sum kind of thinking. If that's Western, then you can talk about harmony enhancement. That's totally indigenous, totally Chinese, and that's a language that they understand easily, And it's the same thing as problem solving anyway. It's the same thing as going for a win-win settlement, So what it is, it amounts to something like agreeing on goals and objectives, and you can debate on strategies, methods, and solutions. I think the conflict will call it a flexible rigidity. The rigid part is the goals, the objective. Don't compromise that. Don't yield. But then the flexibility comes in ways to achieve the goals, and those things can be debated and can be disagreed upon, and so on and so forth. So yeah, Chinese can do that at all. I mean, this is not foreign to them at all. And in fact, this notion has been supported by my colleague in Hong Kong, Dean Chosro. I think he was on faculty at Simon Fraser at some point, right? He's done a series of work looking at Chinese conflict behavior, and he found that for Chinese, and I think he has some Japanese data too. So if they see an interdependent goal with other people, then actually that perception can lead to what he calls constructive controversy, that people can debate and can disagree and so on. And constructive controversies produce all kinds of positive outcomes, so positive attitudes and positive outcomes in terms of finding out the best solutions and so on and so forth. So Chinese can actually debate and can disagree and so on and so forth. But the condition is that they must see their relationships as interdependent. And my argument is that when you see interdependent goal, then this harmony enhancement motive is much more salient. It's made salient by that perceived interdependence. In other words, this is a contextual variable. Interdependence is a contextual variable that encourages harmony enhancement. Okay, so once people are in that mode, then they can obviously debate, they can disagree, they can confront, and so on and so forth, right? So this is sort of a condition where you see controversies being positive and being pursued. This is an interesting kind of strategy. It's not based on my research, but it's derived from research by David Sayre. If you frame disagreements as task-related, not interpersonally focused, then Chinese can debate, for 3 days nonstop. It's not a problem. Recall my earlier remark on this set of findings, right? The Chinese are not so much affected by task conflict, but they're much more frightened by interpersonal conflict, right? Because of that disintegration avoidance. They worry that if the conflict is interpersonal in nature, it may run out of control, and then the relationship might just turn crazy, right? They worry about that a lot, and then that affects their willingness to engage in a debate. So, but if you frame the disagreement as all task-focused, we're doing this, we are just fighting because we want to fix a certain problem, or we want to identify a more cost-effective solution, then people can really debate and so on. So this is another way to promote openness in in problem solving. This is more for the Westerners. Balance problem solving activities with team building activities. I mean, I guess, I don't know if I dramatize it, but team building is a big management fad in the West. I mean, how many books you have on teams? You go to the bookstore, right? So team is by definition more long term, right? It's not transactional. So Westerners are not. This notion of a team is not foreign to any Westerners. I mean, having a good working relationship is not foreign to any Westerner. These notions are, I think, well known in the West too. Just that the Asians emphasize it a little bit more, right? So I think this balance is. I guess Westerners may focus more on task than on the team. That's why there are tons of books on team building in the West. So I think that can be balanced a little bit more if you have an intercultural working relationship. Accommodation, I know Rosalie wrote a paper on this long time ago, right? You remember your 2x2, like 15 years ago. It's not 15, it's more like 10, right? Okay. Both sides can sort of work toward each other a little bit so that they have a good team. So Westerners learn to read subtle cues about dissatisfaction, frustration, objection. Remember my curve, right? If they're unhappy but they don't act, they don't show it, then you don't know. But it's not true. They do show it, but you have to read the cues, right? Like I remember my American friend, she was surprised. But I think if many Chinese could, in her situation, probably could pick up the cues. I mean, they were like facial expressions, or maybe they are not obvious, but you can tell that people are not that happy and they don't go to lunch anymore, But that may be a sign that they don't really get along that well already, So, and Asians need to learn how to articulate disagreements and objections clearly and marshal facts and figures to support them. So being a better scientist, so to speak. If you want to dislike something, don't just say you dislike it. Tell people why and dig up some evidence, and make a strong case and just be a good advocate for your position, right? These Asians should probably do more of that. And Asians should pay more attention to long-term relationship phase. Don't insult people in public or don't criticize people in public so much, and unless for sure they can take it. This Chinese saying, you can say anything to me, but in private, If you're in a meeting, you tell everybody I'm wrong, then I lose my face and I can't really deal with anybody anymore. And Westerners should learn more about compromises. And Asians should learn, or should at least pay attention to focusing on problems and push the limit of coming up with the best solutions, because if you always look for compromises, and it has that sense of sloppiness, that you're not really doing your best, and why you need to compromise every time, and so on. So right, so Asians should learn how to push the limit of arguing for the best solution. So let me conclude that I think conflict energizes us to be creative and search for the best solution. That's very nice, and there's such a thing as positive conflict, actually. But genuine harmony binds us together to work for a better future, and that's sort of the social glue, that will sort of make us go through good times and bad times. Let me end with the wisdom of Confucius. Many of you may have heard of this saying before. The gentleman agrees with others without being an echo. The small man echoes without being in agreement. If you read Confucianism, actually it talks about diversity of views. I mean, it's not like a monolithic focus that you might have about Confucius, So I just end my talk with this quote from the Analects again. So, well, I'm done with my talk, and we have a little bit of time, maybe, I don't know, answer a few short questions. Yeah.
I want to go back to one thing this gentleman in the yellow shirt said earlier, and I think that what my understanding was, he was looking to. And if not, then I would like to ask. Look at the influence of Confucianism on culture, and I'd like to reframe that and ask you what the half-life of Confucianism is, especially when it's not being reinforced by an active Confucian cultural awareness. That is, what is the influence that's embedded in the culture, even when it's not actively involved in the external culture, people aren't reading or studying or learning about it. There's got to be a half-life. It continues for how many hundred years before it starts dropping and dropping and dropping?
Well, Confucianism sort of waxes and wanes in Chinese history. In fact, now leaders in Beijing actually quote Confucianism, believe me or not. I mean, they actually quote this quite a bit now, this saying. The English is funny. I mean, I must say, I don't know if you get much out of the English translation, but the Chinese, if you can read Chinese, the Chinese I think makes a lot more sense. So it's coming back again a little bit, even in communist China, that people actually, you may know that it was banned for some time, especially during the Cultural Revolution. Everything all had to be discarded, So it was not talked about for a long time in mainland China. That's why my PhD students have not read any analects and so on. I did when I was young, They didn't do it. So now it's coming back a little bit. So now I expect more reference to Confucianism in mainland China in the next 10 years. I would believe that because harmony is now a national policy. In fact, you may not know that there are two national policies in mainland China. One is harmony, the other one is innovation. About harmony and innovation, It's almost like harmony and conflict, because to innovate you must be in conflict, You don't like what people have done, that's why you want something different. I mean, by definition you must be in conflict with the past. So these are the two national policies in China.
But you said that people aren't studying, they're not reading, they really don't know about Confucianism. And the point I'm trying to make, and I think he was trying to make, is, but the influence is still there, and it continues even if it starts to wane slightly, until it's reintroduced again, because it's so indoctrinated, so enculturated into daily life.
With political purposes being served for resurrection.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think.
But that's not Confucianism. That's just as you said. It's a political agenda. That's not ingrained in part of the culture.
Confucianism, as interpreted or understood by people in certain political powers, which will benefit them or which will serve the purposes they're using.
That's an argument made by my last governor, Chris Patton. Yeah. Our last governor. He wrote a book about Hong Kong, and I don't know if you can get it in Canada. I read it. It was quite interesting. It was basically making your argument that people selectively use Confucianism to advance some political goal. And that's interesting. Yeah.
From your individual samples, did you see any difference in harmony enhancement values between people who were born and brought up in a particular setting versus people who had been exposed to outside cultures? So I'm asking for different.
Probably probably all of my Beijing respondents did not. Probably they were not exposed to any foreign culture. But by exposed, I mean they probably had not lived outside of China. Probably, I'm sure they exposed to Hollywood movies, so I think they probably never lived outside of China. I would imagine they're not students; they were working people. Yeah.
But have they been exposed to management education programs? For instance, I would assume that, let's say, given the popularity of management education programs, if they've taken courses in business administration.
Some of them probably, because we had a diverse group, so some were not that educated, some were more educated. Probably selectively, yeah. Some may. Yeah, I think some had a university education. Probably not in management though. They were from all walks of life, so they could have an engineering education.
I think you can also turn this around and you can say that if you read most of the publications from the Harbour negotiation project, Yuri and Leung, you'd say that these guys have obviously been strongly influenced by Confucian value system because all of the 10 or so points that they advocate, as far as I'm concerned, from my own educational background, which is pretty much limited to Chinese studies, it looks like it comes right out of traditional Chinese civilization.
Yeah.
They say everything is,
So
keep the focus on commonality of interests.
Yeah.
Don't ever negotiate from position. From your position, you negotiate from principles, and the principles must be that of mutual benefit, which is about as Confucian as you get. But to address an earlier issue about Confucianism and reading the classics, you don't have to read the classics to be inculcated with traditional Chinese values, which granted are primarily, they're not just Confucian. And by the way, Confucianism of the Zhou dynasty when Confucius lived was certainly not the same as Confucianism of the Han dynasty when it was re-assimilated. And Confucianism of the Han dynasty was certainly not the Confucianism of the Tang and the Song contrast to those that we have grown up learning. I'm thinking, for example, of 让人三分不为输. A 30% compromise is no defeat. Every Chinese has grown up with the assumption that you can you can come out of a negotiation situation not losing, but with a certain amount of compromise.
Right. So compromise has a much more positive connotation in China than in the West, I think. But in this Beijing sample, actually, they didn't like compromising. They liked it less than the Australians. That's why it's opposite of what we anticipated. Yes.
It would be interesting to see how the way you frame the questions and related it to, let's say, people born in Vancouver but whose grandparents or great-grandparents came over from mainland China.
Right. Or even some current, like some international students from China or some first-generation immigrants. That would be very interesting how they react to this harmony items and then the context styles. Yeah. Then you get into acculturation issues.
Well, and penetration of cultures.
Yeah.
Which I guess is one.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe you have a final question.
About the Chinese making more sense. I'm just looking at the Chinese specifically, but in the characters, the gestalts, whatever they are, what's the small man? Which character is small man? Which character is gentleman? Which is agreement? Which is echo?
Small man is kind of like an immoral person. All right. The gentleman is like a moral person.
But which character is it?
Okay. This first two.
First character.
First two refers to the gentleman, and the second sentence, the first two refer to the small man. It may sound funny to you, like a small one is a small man.
You can really translate those as a civilized person and an uncivilized person.
Right. That's
one has a head and the other.
Yeah.
And the echo and agreement, which ones are they?
This okay. Let's see if I can find this is harmony. Harmony, but not the same. Harmony not being the same. This is the uncivilized person is in agreement, but not in harmony. Right. This is same or agree. This is no harmony. So you can agree without being in harmony. Okay. But that's what uncivilized or immoral people do. They agree, but they don't really have harmony. It's like you sort of it's not ingratiation, right? You be nice to your boss, that kind of thing. But here it's like you have harmony, but you disagree, right? And that comes from Confucius himself directly, 2,600 years ago. So he's not saying like, okay, we've got to be monolithic. It's just one view, no disagreement. That's not what he said. And Chinese don't get a lot of that actually. That's why it's been talked about by the political leaders in Beijing now, because the secular version is, we want if you're in harmony, then you and I must disagree, must agree, right? That's the secular version. So in a way, you get a lot of input from Confucius, but part of it you don't get from your daily kind of experience, So this is from the classics, and that's not. I think most Chinese don't really do that too much. So that's why I say. Confucius himself is more like strong on principles and sort of he really doesn't care about confrontation so much, and disagreement so much. Okay.
Thank you for a very, very interesting and thought-provoking presentation. You've generated enough notes on the back of my announcement that will keep me quite busy in my retirement for I think for a good while yet. Not the least of which is taking the obliging, negotiating, compromising, problem-solving, dominating thing and looking for parallels, because this covers everything, right? And looking for parallels in the Chinese version of what covers everything, and that is ren yi li zhi xin, where it looks to me like maybe the benevolence that is unselfishness, that looks like obliging. Yi is righteousness, which looks to me like domination. Li, which is ritualistic behavior, looks like negotiating. Zhi, trust is compromised because you maybe I don't know. Anyway, it's really thought-provoking for me. And the other thing is, you said you wrote establish common goals and build feelings of interdependence. I think we have to add something there, and because I know you believe in systems thinking, and by definition, a system is discrete elements in a relationship for a shared purpose, a common goal. I mean, basically all systems are discrete elements in relationships for a goal. I think we have to add something, which would be establish common goals and build the feelings of interdependence for the mutual benefit of the cooperating elements. Because if the discrete elements don't feel that the sacrifice involved in cooperation has a payoff,